Great. Good. Let me just get this up on here. Hi, Kathie.
Hi, Andrew.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks. It's very nice to be here.
Oh, good. It's great to see you. I'm just going to do this on here a second, Kathie. 1 second. There we are. Brilliant. Oh, Kathie, it's great to see you. Hi, everybody. Just going to wait for people to come and get in the room with us and join us. But we've got the amazing Kathie Gregory here this evening, who we've known each other quite a while, actually, Kathie. We first met at the, was it the Pause on the Beach?
It was, yeah, a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember it being quite a warm but very windy day.
Yes.
And we were having to kind of pin things down and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
and that's a few years ago now. I think it must be about 4 years ago, 5 years ago or something.
I think it's definitely 5, maybe perhaps 6.
And
time flies.
Time really does fly. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the thing about Facebook memories, right? I think they're bittersweet, some of them, of course, especially when some of our dear departed doggies pop up, you know. And but it is a great reminder of how precious time is, I think, because you think, wow, is it really that time already? And even with Molly, right, she's been with us 12. In fact, tomorrow is the 12-month anniversary for when we were officially Molly's. Obviously, we had her a bit before fostering her, but the official papers were signed a year ago tomorrow. So it just reminds us of that.
Yeah, that has gone quickly.
Yeah, it has gone quickly. Oh, here we go. Hi, Sonia. Yeah, we've got quite a few people in the room now, so this is great. Okay, well, great, Kathie. So, been really looking forward to this. We've been trying to arrange this for a little while, of course, and just trying to get our schedules together. So, we're going to come on to getting you to talk a little bit about free will teaching in a bit. And we'll also touch on your 2 amazing books, Tale of Two Horses and Puppy Called Wolfie. We'll touch on those a little bit as well. But to get started, people are always interested in people's origin stories, and yours is interesting. So let's share it. How did Kathie come to start thinking about having a different approach to animals and that connection? And you know, where was that kind of inspiration for you?
Okay, that inspiration came when me and my husband Matt moved into our first house. We both worked, and I'd grown up with dogs, he'd grown up with cats, and as we worked, having a dog was not a viable situation. So we decided that cats were the way forward. And in 1999, I believe, we got Cracker and Snowflake, and it wasn't long before I was saying to Matt, yeah, I know what they're thinking, I know what they want, I know what's going on here. And I've been going on at him for a while, and he says, for goodness sake, go and do some research and look something up and get a course or something. So it was him that kicked it all off, and I went, okay. So I did. I started off by reading books, and I think I bought every cat behavior book that was out there at the time, and there was something missing, because whilst they were factual in terms of what behavior means, none of them went into what cats were thinking. None of them went into the emotions, how they were feeling, or that side of it. So I exhausted the books and found myself a course. I trained with Cope, who at the time was the only organisation I found that worked with the emotional side. And from there, that's kind of where it all started for me.
That's really interesting. So you're first there, Kathie, because quite often people's stories, it's that dog that kind of gets you to throw out the rule book, or it's that individual person. Like I know some of these people have been big influences for you, of course, people like Sheila Harper. But actually your first thing was a cat.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, so cats, yeah. And what was it that made you think actually the emotional experience of this cat is actually really important? I need to work out more about that. What gave you that intrinsically that you felt that was the thing that you need to look for?
Because I needed to know if I was right, and that I was doing the best for them. And there was never any conscious decision or thought that was, we should look at the emotional side. It was just, well, where is the emotional side in the things that I'd read so far? That to me was always at the forefront of everything.
That was something quite innate for you then, something that you were already as an individual, maybe even thinking about other people, having more of an empathetic, compassionate approach. That was very much kind of Kathie's approach. Yeah. So Cope's a great educator, of course, and like you say, way ahead of their time in many ways regarding looking at the emotional side of things, especially with the EMRA system and all the things that came along with that. Was it working with the cats that got you thinking about those early seeds regarding the free will teaching, or did that come later?
That's quite a difficult question, actually, because again, there's no defining moment. I talked to Cracker and Snowflake, and I talked to all the other cats that we had, and conversation and language and talking to them was always a big part of that. And I started out actually as a cat behaviourist. That's where I did my first years. And then when I started, when we were able to, and we moved home and I wasn't working full time, we were able to get our first dog. And so I started moving more towards working with dogs as well. But that language, that understanding, asking them how they felt, what did they want, and that communication between the species was always there.
And did you find it more, so when you started thinking about the when you had your first dog and you were already kind of thinking about some of this foundational stuff, and I think what's important for me is it doesn't really matter about species when you start thinking about these things. For me, it's about recognizing two things: species specific need, that might be different, but species specific ways of communicating need. And once you understand those two, you can apply pretty well anything, isn't it? Did you find the change then when you sort of, because I think with cats there is less in the zeitgeist about cats. People just live with cats, they kind of accept a lot of stuff from cats. There's a lot of indoctrination with dogs though, isn't there? Not just socially and within the general public, but also professionally, especially at that point. I'm guessing there was still a very heavy possible dominance model, maybe, but definitely operant model that you kind of stepped into when you started thinking about dogs. Did you find that was something that you just kind of went along with, or right from the start were you thinking at this again, this is thinking again at?
That is a very interesting point, because the way we approach working with the cats is to look at the cat's needs, look at what's wrong, look at how not just their emotional needs but also their physical needs. And pretty much the owners were on board with making those changes and understanding that the cat needed to have those things as that species. Stepping into the dogs was very different, because we're now not looking at what the dog needs, we're now looking at what we need and what we want. And that was a very big difference back then. It was all about the dog fitting into us. The way that we were supposed to work with dogs wasn't the same way that I'd always worked with cats.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because even going back along with cats, as I say, there wasn't that kind of presumption from caregivers, from owners. They probably were like, "Oh, that's interesting," and they kind of went along with it. And but with the dogs, it must be really difficult. I think many of us, I include myself here, we end up being channeled along a very operant-minded approach, because that's
Yeah.
what you do, even
Yeah.
though in the back of your mind you're thinking, there's bits of this that doesn't make sense for me.
Yeah.
And then you kind of find your way through with things. But you kind of pretty well came straight in thinking there's something, again, we're not addressing emotional need here with that. So how did you go about that in those days? Is this when you found Sheila, or did you kind of muddle through for a bit?
No, in those early days, I, like many people, felt I had to conform. So I did, to some extent I did the usual classes with all the usual things that we were all told were important, and that is what a dog needs. I was always very relaxed about it and finding different ways and saying, well, look, if that's not their thing, that's not their thing, don't worry about it. So there was always that there, but I did feel back then that to some extent I needed to conform.
It's interesting. I was up in the, I dared to go in our attic the other day. Oh my God. It's a scary place because there's like 20 years of my rubbish up there. Now we've got Kieran's rubbish up there. But anyway, and I was looking through and I came across some old files from clients, probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And it's interesting just to read back on some of the things. I really pitted them back then, because remember, I just moved from human support to dogs. So my early reports, I don't even call them reports now, I call them support notes, but they were reports back then, and they're like 15 pages long. And I thought, my God, do people really read that? Am I poor people? But I could see the conflict in my own words now, reading back on it. It's interesting. The caregivers wouldn't know any difference. They're like, okay, I get it. But it was just very task oriented. It was very opera-minded, but with a huge push of trying to build in an emotional based narrative. And it's interesting. I think it's important that we all share that. We've all been on a journey here. Very few of us kind of come straight in as the full thing. I think it's perhaps a little bit easier now starting actually, because you can have access to a lot of these kind of these conversations, and you can kind of feel your way through. And but of course that's another problem with our industry, isn't it, really? You know, when I think about Kieran at the hospice, you know, the first 6 months of the hospice, he was being mentored and he was being shown stuff. He didn't have to kind of you know, take his knowledge base and see what he did with it. We kind of have to do that. We learn stuff, we go and have our education, but then invariably we're trying to find things out ourselves. It's quite tough, isn't it? It's quite hard.
Yeah, definitely.
So at what point did you get to connect to Sheila then? So Sheila Harper, obviously Sheila's one of the first people that we had come and chat in dog centre care, because I just love Sheila, and I think it's really important to remember that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Especially these conversations we have. People talk about the new things. They're not new, of course. It's just that they've got more of a spotlight on now. And Sheila is one of the early pioneers, really starting to think about things more from an individual dog and how we communicate with them and how they process their environment around them, of course. So please check that out on the Dog Centre Care YouTube channel. I might do a little replay actually on Sheila's chat, because it was a good one. Yeah, so when did you meet Sheila then? How did that come about?
I haven't met Sheila.
Have you not met her? Right.
No, I haven't.
Did you do her course?
No.
Oh, I've made a big boo-boo there. Sorry.
That's quite all right.
That's what happens at the end. I seem to remember you saying you'd done Sheila's course before.
No, I haven't.
Put that to one side then. Forget about the Sheila bit. So when did your connection to horses come about then? We'll jump forward a little bit.
Well, that was my husband again. He's doing well here, isn't he, at guiding me?
You married well, I think.
I did indeed marry
so
well.
That's always helpful.
He bought me 2 horses for my 40th birthday as a surprise. And although I went to see them beforehand, and you know, we checked that they liked me, there was a connection, and you know, obviously that we were with the right home. I don't mean it was a complete and utter surprise, but it was a surprise. I didn't know who was going to do that. And of course by then I was already working with the dogs in a more basic version of what free will teaching now is. And I was very, very sure that I would not conform, because I got over my earlier lack of confidence and feeling that I needed to conform with the dogs and run things the same as people expect. And with the horses, I think I remember saying to Matt, not doing any of this. I'm going to do it my way. I'm not even going down that road. And of course, that was easier, wasn't it, really, with the, well, no, actually it's quite difficult with the horses, but it was easy because they were my horses. Whereas of course, working with the dogs, whilst I could do completely what I wanted with mine, there was always that client expectation of what they want from either a class or a behavior consult or whatever it is that they were wanting. So that conformity with the dogs was not just about the industry, but also about clients' expectations and as well. Whereas of course with the horses, they were mine, they weren't clients' horses. So I could just say, you know what, I'm not even going there.
This is really important, because I think assumptions and expectations, they're really important. I'm doing my next workshop on this topic because it's just really important. It's like me making the assumptions that you'd met Sheila Harpy, for example. This thing about the expectations for us as professionals, even working with dogs, who says we have to do classes that way? Who says we have to do consults that way?
No,
actually, and actually, I think we need to kind of free ourselves to explore things. And
we do. And
with Molly, for example, because she came as this pup, we had the same discussion. I said to Kieran, right, we've got this opportunity here, because we weren't looking for a puppy, you know, the universe dropped her in our lap, and we started off fostering her, and we weren't going to have.
It was very obvious that she was going
everybody
to
keeps saying that, yeah. And so I said to her, look, this is our chance to bring up this wonderful, unique, kind of beautiful being here, and to do it and to really put our money where our mouth is, and just to give her the safe spaces to explore and to learn and do a lot of the kind of experimental environmental learning without much of the kind of interference from us. And I guess that was similar for you with the horses then, because with the cats you kind of felt things a little bit different. You got a good knowledge there from Cope. The dogs, like many of us, you end up kind of doing things the way that people do stuff, but just trialing a few things out. And then you had this, not just two animals of your own, but a complete different species, right? Most husbands buy flowers, but there's two horses. Sort of bigger. So what an amazing opportunity to think, right, I'm going to just see what these horses need from me.
Yeah, I mean,
because this is very much what comes from the book, this notion of allowing yourself to kind of learn first, the humbleness.
I mean, by the time I got the horses, I was already working with my clients with free will teaching for the previous 3 years with the dogs. So I was already well down the road of that before I got the horses. And I was confident enough to roll it out to clients. But going back to your previous point about conforming, I think it's not just about what we think is expected of us via the industry and via clients, but it's also about feeling you want to fit in. You know, and when you stand up and you say, hey, I'm different, it's a brave thing to do. And I mean, the thing that really sort of helped me with that in terms of clients was that my clients would come here and I'd talk to my dogs, and I'd had a run of sort of 3 or 4 clients who saw my dogs, and they said, you're talking to them. They're listening. They're really listening to you. They're understanding what you're saying. That you're just having a conversation. I'm going, yes. And I started getting a little bit brave and saying, well, this is kind of what I do. This is what the mind does. This is how the mind works, blah, blah, blah. Fortunately, those clients all happened to work with people. And of course, they said to me, oh, well, that's what I do. You're telling me that this is what you do. Well, I want to learn this. How do I do this with my dog? So that kind of gave me that confidence to really step away from feeling I needed to conform or fit in with anything, and I could do my own thing. So of course, by the time the horses arrived, I'd already been doing it for three odd years with clients with the dogs. So it was a fairly easy transition, like you say, as long as you understand the species specifics and the capabilities of their mind and how that, you know, what you're doing there, then it's a fair, you know, we all kind of do the same thing. The mind works in the same way for mammals, pretty much.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think, what we're finding is, and it's all good timing really, is that this narrative in different voices sharing their own experiences and their own kind of outlooks. We've also got science that seems to be catching up a little bit. So we've got people who are brave enough to actually say, okay, that might not be species specific, but we can extrapolate from that because it's similar brain,
exactly,
similar nervous system responses or whatever. We haven't kind of waited for things. And I think some of the science that we'd need, if people were waiting for that, probably wouldn't be allowed now anyway. I think we have to extrapolate and we have to connect.
And I think that's really good because clearly we need science and it's a very, very valuable thing. But I think if we just say, well, we can't do anything unless we've got that empirical evidence, we'll be waiting forever. Science is a lot more than that, and we've got to be able to be knowledgeable enough to know and research whether what we're doing is going down the wrong road and clearly isn't possible, or whether it is and it's just that science, that's not something that science has focused on and studied in depth. But like you say, the similarities that we can get now that we know that the brains pretty much do work in the same way and there are the same capabilities and the same brain areas, that really, it kind of helps move things on, I think.
It does, and I think one of the big things is, if Janet Finley wrote a great article a couple of days ago. It's in the group, actually.
She did. I saw it. Science. Yes.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
And it's great to kind of look at that and to recognize how science needs to. We need to see science as supportive, not as something that is definitive as the whole. Because there's too many things. I think if we feel that we're making a connection to another, if we feel that we are feeling that connection, then that's really important. And I think the anecdotal, the personal experience is important. And I think this is why I talk in terms of the emotional experience, as you know, that's just how I frame it. But I think you're saying there about your clients who are like, wow, I kind of do that in my job. Yeah. I think the thing about the emotional experiences, we all have one. And whether you work in a term of supporting others, or even if you're looking at how best to support yourself, we can all relate to that and the importance of connection. And we know how important the dog's brain is for looking for those safe, especially social connections. And so yeah, I think we're in a place now where we can start to not feel so scared to talk about some stuff without the fear of some of that comes along. And it was very difficult, I think, because you kind of referenced it earlier, that when you talk about things that are slightly away from the safe norm, if you like, that kind of that safe narrative that is put as a perceived wisdom, if you like. Yeah. It can be really tricky, especially in our community, I think, perhaps more traditionally. I think the internet has helped in some ways because we're having this chat now, right? And we have groups like Dog Centre and that kind of thing. But have you felt yourself, having been talking about these things? I remember having a conversation with you all that time ago on the beach. Mm-hmm. And we're going to come on to this now. This next bit will come on to looking at free will teaching in more detail. But I thought I got it. But when I spoke to you, I realized I didn't actually. And I think this is important. And that I had the opportunity to speak to you. And I came away from there thinking, right, actually, there's bits of that I hadn't quite got my head into the right lens, if you like. Uh-huh. And I know that's something that we'll talk about in a minute, but do you think that there is, for you personally, that the environment is more open now to having these discussions and being able to put out content and feel that people will not only accept it but embrace it?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And that's a brilliant thing, because with all the knowledge out there, with all the different people, with all of our different focuses and our different perspectives, I think that's a really, really good thing.
And that's what I like about the majority. There's always some areas where people can find it difficult to have connections, but majority of people talking more openly and freely on these kind of topics around emotionality and around connection, there seems to be more of a sense of community around it. I think we feel more collaborative about it.
Definitely.
Which is interesting, isn't it? So let's get onto the kind of some of the nitty-gritty on free will teaching then. When did before we unpack it, I'm interested to know, when did the actual term come to you? When did that phrase come to you?
I used to have my business cards used to say Kathie Gregory, animal behaviourist, and my little strap line was working with free will, and I had that for a few years, and somewhere along the line, before I wrote the first book, I kind of changed it to free will teaching. I was just updating the business cards and thinking, how does this work? How, when you're not brilliant at design and you sit there and you go, right, must design a new business card. What do I want to say?
But you know what? I think I just had a bit of a moment then, Kathie, actually, just hearing you say working with free will, right? Because what an amazing strapline to have, but extrapolate that out, what a profound saying. I think working with free will would actually have been a much better phrase or description to something like force free or anything else. It really does hit home, doesn't it, about what this is about, really. I think
it really does. And I think the teaching bit came from the fact that I don't train. I think teaching and training, as we know, we've had other people on discussing that, Mandy being one of them. And there is a difference between training and teaching. So the working with free will and then thinking, but actually I can't put myself, I can't say, I mean, generally I tend to put myself as a behaviourist, but of course I also did the puppy classes and, shall we say, more training, especially when I started out. I did what everybody else did and, did what clients wanted, which was training. But that was purely because I wasn't confident, didn't quite know how to go against what everybody else was doing. I certainly didn't want to stick my hand up and stand out.
So anybody who's come into my workshop, sold out now, by the way. So say sadly, but it's not sadly, but anyway, but I will do another one for anybody who's interested. But because this notion of expectations and assumptions and all these kind of things, actually, it holds a lot of our colleagues back, I think, from shifting how they work. And who is it that says that those people that come up to your training classes, and we have to call them that to get people to know what it is, I guess. Who says that they have those expectations? We don't ask them. And actually they're there to learn, and they're there to get help, and they're there to kind of so I think having worked almost exclusively for the last 5 or 6 years in a way that connects through the emotional experience personally, I think I can count on one hand the people that weren't ready for that.
Exactly.
Didn't connect to it. Everybody else, they really got it, because we all have an emotional experience. We all have a need to be heard. We all want to have our own care and support needs listened to. We all want to be able to communicate safely.
And I think maybe sometimes we think other people won't understand us, and then we hold ourselves back instead of saying, well, let's see. Because that's then scary, isn't it? Getting out there saying, let's see, it takes you out of that safe place. But actually, if the two sides can connect, people are looking for solutions and things to do with their dogs that is less narrow. And then there are lots of people, professionals, that actually want to work that way. And if we can just take that step, even in a small way with that first client, and take it from there.
And I think that's the thing. My late father had a great saying, which was just turn up. And that's, but it's hard to turn up sometimes, especially when you think, well, this is what I believe, this is my values, this is how I want to work. But anybody listening from a trainer, and I get quite a lot of stuff in my inbox from people who hear a lot of these discussions and want to make the shift, but they say that it's a bit nervous too, because they feel that they have to do something very different, and it's not. It's just providing a different lens, and it's how you connect to people, I think. I know my colleague Lucy Holders, wonderful Lucy, and her partner Howard up in Exeter, they're doing all their puppy and adolescent things in this way, in a very let's learn from your dog first. Oh yeah, so you want to teach that? Okay, well, I get that. So actually, if we learn that from the dog first, we can find out the best way to get your dog to connect to you and all that kind of thing. And it's just putting it in that way. And they have huge waiting lists because people want that, because people see these dogs who are well regulated and able to communicate and all this kind of thing. Great, good. So hopefully that's helped people who are thinking, just like you say, give it a go, even if it's with that first couple of clients or maybe one class. But people don't know what they're coming for. That's the point. They think they do, but you know, free will teaching then, Kathie. Talk us through that then. What is it do you feel kind of is central to the ethos behind free will teaching for you?
Well, that's the easy bit. We've already said that. It's free will. That is where everything stems from. It is every being's ability to be able to live their life as they want to. Now, that does not mean chaos. Obviously, we all live, if we're able to, we want to be able to live a life that we choose to live, but within the boundaries of obviously society and laws and what's sensible and what's not. So it isn't just letting the dogs do what they want to do. That, if you did that with dogs and young children, well, that would just be chaos, wouldn't it? It's certainly not that, but it is about providing them with the environment and the support and the opportunities to be who they can be.
That is such a beautiful way to frame it, I think. And I remember reading something recently that was written about me, and they said, oh, this is the guy who doesn't like training and doesn't think we should do training and thinks we should just let dogs get on with it. It's interesting that people perceive that's what we're saying. When actually,
I've had that said to me a few times, or by people have said to me, oh yes, I was talking to so-and-so and they think you just leave the dogs to run free. I'm like, okay, fair enough, but that's not what it is.
No, and I think part of this is when we think, oh, you've gone a bit dark there. Are we okay? Well, there you go. Got a bit black and white. I don't know what happened there.
I have, haven't I?
Yeah, that's okay. We're all right. I can see you. You just got a bit.
Let me go and see if I can put a light on.
Okay.
I have gone very dark. How strange.
You've gone grayscale for a minute. It might be because the lights changed direction. Oh, there you go. Full colour. Yeah, that's great. Oh, that was okay. It's gone again now.
Oh, there we go.
Cool.
I quite like grayscale, but I don't think everybody can see me very well.
Oh, that's great. Somebody says it's like a film noir. It is exactly.
Yes.
We've got you back in.
I think the sun has departed.
Glorious Technicolor now again. Yes. So so I think it's interesting. But the thing is, I don't say these things personally because I know what filter they want to look at it through, and I think part of the thing that's been sold with heavy training is the notion of compliance, and that compliance equals safety. Yes. Obedience equals safety. Yes. And I think it is about us. You use the term environment there because that's an important part of it. Because of course safety is important, and I did a talk with Holly, Tet, and Laura Donaldson recently, the three of us looking at safety, connection, and freedom, the three words. And how intertwined they are, and how often there is a compromise. So it's like, well, I want to give you some freedom, but I've got to keep you safe. I want to develop a connection with you, but I've got to keep you safe. So we look at those kind of parameters that we work with. But then I think the big thing for me is understanding the difference between our obsession, really, as a species, with structured learning. This notion of I'm going to teach you something, and the power of experimental learning, environmental learning, which of course is the oldest form of learning when you think about it, because that's how we learn stuff. That's how we learn, how we connect.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, again, it comes down to, you see, that structured learning, if we look at it, is about control. We might not think it is, but it is. And that keeps us in our comfort zone because it's not unpredictable. It doesn't mean that we all have the mindset that we wish to control our dogs. It means that if we look at our psychology, we can see that actually that control makes us feel safe. It means that things are predictable. It means that we know what's going on. And as we know, the brain likes familiarity, and things that are unpredictable then obviously need a lot more thought, a lot more analysing, and we don't necessarily know what to do. So that control, I think, is not about a surface control of wanting to control the dog. I think it's more about how do we go with the flow? How do we just go with it?
And that's important, isn't it? Because I think structured learning is about control, of course, because the person doing the teaching has a certain control over a narrative, and it's like, this is it. And then what Mandy Wilson talked about in the group, again, check out Mandy's chat in the YouTube channel, the difference between attainment and achievement, and how structured education pushes more often, always, towards attainment. And
that's right.
And I think this is important because, as I've said in my some of the stuff I've done previously, there is a big difference between what we're taught and what we learn. Even during the being taught process, we're also learning something else at the same time.
Absolutely.
Often about feeling safe or not, actually, and being able to do things. And actually, free will teaching is also about free will thinking, actually, when you think about it. It's breaking from that.
It is. Absolutely. Because, you know, people say to me, so what do I do? And my answer, unfortunately, is, well, I don't know, do I? It depends on the day. It depends on the conversation you're having with that dog at that time. I can't tell you what to do in advance, because that then is no longer, aside from it, it's no longer free will. And then you're trying to control and get a particular outcome.
And this is important, isn't it? Because I think it's a little bit like, when people ask some questions to me, and some of the things I talk about, especially regarding social processing and social threat evaluation, that kind of thing, I need to invite them to have a perception shift first, because I see it a little bit like those little kids binocular toy things that you can kind of change the different
kaleidoscope,
that kind of thing.
Fabulous, yes.
I was thinking about like that kind of the imagery thing, but yeah, this kaleidoscope is exactly the same. And I think that's what is happening when you get asked that question. Okay, Kathie, free will teaching, when my dog does this, what happens, right?
Yeah.
They need to see what it is that you're inviting them to feel
precisely
first. And then they can look at that and they'll probably answer it themselves now. They'll be like, right, I can see that this is,
Yeah, precisely. And I must admit, going back a few years, I dreaded somebody particularly peers, somebody asking me that question, because I'm like, well, I can't just tell you the answer in a sentence. It's a whole concept and a framework that comes together to give you the ability to communicate effectively with your dog, to understand each other, to listen to each other, to have that relationship. And it isn't just a do step A, B, C, D. It's more about having that concept and framework in place. And once you know that perspective, you know what to do. So then if people say to me, well, okay, so I get it, I know what to do for this aspect of my dog's life, but now what do I do for this aspect? And I go, well, exactly the same. What's different is more the top level of how you interact, the choices, the language, the learning, what the experiences, how you are teaching that dog the self-awareness, the comprehension and understanding you're giving the dog in that aspect of his life, is different to the language, the conversation, the comprehension and understanding you give to your dog in another aspect of his life. But underpinning all that is exactly the same concept and framework. We don't do something completely different for one thing and completely different for another.
Yeah, do you know, I think that's really powerful. And I think it's the perception shift that I'm passionate about, that I'm trying, that I think we need to support, so people feel safe in that perception shift. It's almost like back in the Matrix film, using all references today with the two pills. It's like you can have that one and keep doing things the way you are, or take that one and see things very differently.
Yes.
But I think when you do see things differently, in my experience with the general public especially, everything falls into place.
It does very quickly.
And that's what I call it, supported awareness. I think that's our first role. Sorry, there's a motorbike going past. I call it supported awareness, because that's our first role, is to support somebody's awareness of what their dog's care and support needs might be. And when you connect that way, and for me, I think what I get from especially a puppy called Wolfie, I think, is this notion of supportive emotional regulation. It's about how we allow ourselves to be better regulated by slowing things down and being connected, really, and not seeing things as being good or bad, right or wrong. And it's about us also feeling that we have the opportunity and the right, I guess, to communicate ourselves and to talk and to say things. And I know that's a big thing with free will teaching, of course, is to actually just talk and explain. And it's interesting for me, and I'll have to look this up and try and put it in the comments or share it in the group. I read something recently in the last few months where they had about 100 people, and they were looking at what the caregivers, the owners, had taught their dogs through a structured way, and what their dogs knew language-wise, right? And it was something really low, Kathie. It's like 10%, 15% of that dog's vocabulary was taught in a structured way. But also the important stuff for the dog invariably was stuff that had value to them, which is stuff they'd picked up on from others. And we can all relate to that. We can all relate to that, about how our dogs are always trying to connect to what we're trying to communicate.
And a part of the reason for that, of course, is how that learning environment, because of course when we speak, I've got the computer so that you can't see it, but I keep waving my arms about. I'm not sure you can see all of that unless I go like this.
I get the odd flap here and there. I'm saying I have to sit in my hands or else I'm going to take off.
I'll try not to take off. Part of what we do when we speak naturally is our tone of voice and is our body language, and it's there. And when we look at the comparison between structured learning, where we are told that we have to be very controlled and we have to not confuse things and keep things very simple and one word, you see that there's such a vast difference in the two approaches that it's not surprising that the results from a study will show that there are vast differences in how the dog learns and actually what is taken from that.
And of course, we've had a lot of studies come out in the last few years about what we can see now regarding how dogs attach to tone and attach to the ways that things are framed, and even how sentences are structured. They have a much bigger capacity than we thought on that kind of thing. And again, it kind of makes sense because a lot of the things that we might teach a dog, we put on cue. We have to recognize that for some of that stuff, it has no internal value to the dog whatsoever, not whatsoever. Whereas the things that they attach to does. Those are the things that they do. That's that experimental learning again. It's like, hang on, that kind of means something to me, and I want to build that up. And I think also, I'm really careful now. I'm after the Sheila thing. Sheila's awesome, by the way. We can all agree on that. Definitely check out the chat. But I'm sure in one of our conversations you were talking about you were loading up the dishwasher. Is that right? And you were talking to your dogs about that. Was that you I was talking to? Maybe not. But
it could be. It depends what you're going to say about that situation.
I seem to remember it being about one of the dogs wanting to kind of get involved, and it was just kind of just slowing it down and talking through and saying what you were doing and all that kind of thing, and the dog kind of picking up on what was needed within that space. I had that conversation with somebody recently. It wasn't you, it was somebody else.
No, that wasn't me. But yeah, that's a really good example. It really is, because now we know, we've got the studies, we've got the knowledge, we know how that dogs can understand language. And if we, again, there's a misconception sometimes that people will say to me, so you just chatter to your dogs? Well, actually, no, it's educational. There is an actual structure to learning language, and learning it in a way so that you actually gain understanding and comprehension, rather than just learning the names of things. And I mean, yes, of course, we all just have a chat as we're wandering on the field going, now what shall I make for dinner? Or rather, it's what will hubby make for dinner? But actually, when I'm teaching, it's structured language education. And then, of course, we move on from that as we progress, and as the dogs understand, then we no longer need the active teaching. But it is a structure in that respect. There is a structure there to teaching effectively,
and there's a flow to it, isn't there? I think there's a natural connection. A lot of what we do with our dogs is quite an arbitrary thing, and I think it can be very difficult for the dogs to kind of extrapolate from that or connect it to the everyday. And I think when we think about just moving around our home, invitations to our dogs to join in or to do their thing, or all these kind of things, I think it becomes more connected that way, and the brain's probably more responsive because they're in that connected zone. It's not standing in a field doing something quite arbitrary, which the dog is probably thinking,
what is the point? Yes, where's the connection? Yeah, absolutely. And when we have that connection, then we get the same back from our dogs. We get our dogs inviting us to do things, our dogs telling us it's definitely time, get up, mum.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think the more natural that two-way communication becomes, the better, and I think that's important, isn't it? I think, and
absolutely.
Again, I think for the general public, we have a lot of caregivers in the group, of course, listening into this today as well, I'm sure. This is actually, I was going to say easier, but it's more natural for them because they do it anyway, right? Most people talk to their dogs, and there is a certain repetition quite often when they're like, no, do this, do that, do the other, or whatever it is, whatever they're talking about. So I think to get that kind of more focused education that you can provide for them, where they can actually make that done in a more dog accessible way. It also takes a lot of pressure off us as well, I think, because part of the problem with the obedience focus that we've had is the huge amount of expectations that then are thrown on that poor dog, which the caregiver feels they're connected to. So they kind of stuff up. There's a really interesting question here in the room. I just wanted to ask you this because it's something that's come up recently somewhere else, actually, and I think it's interesting. So Sophie says, what do you think about teaching dogs to talk through buttons? For instance, Bunny, the internet famous dog for speaking by pressing buttons with human words on. I have my thoughts on this as well, so we can share together.
Okay. I am only going on the research that I've done because this also came up in my group a couple of months ago. And so I looked into it, I watched some videos, and this is only what I've got from what I've seen. This does not mean that this is right, because I haven't watched everything, but it's conditioning. There's no two ways about it. They're conditioning. And that's very different to teaching a dog to understand language.
And this is the thing for me. I think it's interesting, and I think there's more stuff that might come out down the line, Kathie. But I think for me, two things. First of all, I don't need my dogs to press a button for me. I'd like to try and be connected to them anyway, and think, okay, we need to do this, and I'll provide you with the routines so that you know what's going to be coming and when it's coming, all that kind of thing. But secondly, I think we're missing the beauty in the communicative nuance.
Yes, I was just going to interrupt you and say the connection. Where's the connection? Why do we want our dogs to talk to a button? I want my dogs to talk to me. I want them to look at me. I want to know what they're saying. I want to read their eyes, the rest of their body. I want to hear their voice.
And it's also difficult as well, because the dog might be pressing the button to go to the toilet or press the button to go for the food, but it's going to be hard for that dog to know the difference sometimes, because invariably they would have been trained with food to press the buttons. And then, so I think it's just, I think it's tricky for me, but I think we're both on the same page there for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
That, Sophie said very interesting. Thanks. I've been wondering about exactly that. I know some people are really into it, and I get that. And I think sometimes it can be a bit of fun or whatever it is. But I just think for me, the time we would spend to build up a repertoire around the buttons, that time could have been spent on just building that connection up. I think.
I believe so. I think if you want to do it and it's a bit of fun, absolutely, why not?
Why not?
But I don't see it as working with the free will and teaching.
My husband pushes my buttons sometimes. That's about as far as buttons go around it. Brilliant. Okay, so time's flying by, actually, Kathie. Let's come back to free will teaching.
We've done very well, though, at keeping on track.
We are keeping on track, and I thought we could go off on many a tangent, but we've kept pretty tight, really. So that's really great. So let's talk a little bit about free will teaching, right? So we've talked a little bit about it before. A couple of questions then, and you can just talk about these things as we go. First of all, what are some of the misconceptions, a bit of myth busting that you feel you'd like to do while you have the opportunity to, about what it is and what it isn't? I think that'll be useful. And then secondly, is there a kind of a starting platform, a starting point that you start people on to think about regarding that perception shift, and what is that, to get people to kind of be able to look through the window at least and see, oh, I see that's that, before they might come in and look at these things.
Okay, I guess two of the misconceptions we have already touched on, in that people think that I just leave the dogs to do what they want, and the other misconception is that people don't think that dogs are capable of understanding and comprehending language in the way that they do. I think there's a general misconception that their abilities are a lot lower than they are. I'd also say that there's a misconception in terms of people still being in that sort of mindset of wanting specifics. And of course, when I start talking and I work with clients, they're going, and I should do this again, and I should do this. And I'm going, no, you shouldn't. This is life. This isn't training. This isn't anything to put into that perspective. What I'm doing is life. So there's no training sessions. You don't put aside time to do anything, because you live life. You teach your dogs as you live life. I mean, obviously, if we were working with dogs that have issues with things, sensitivities and whatever, we would obviously look at the environments, and that would be a different aspect of it. But if we're just looking at teaching our dogs and bringing up that level of comprehension and understanding, we're doing it as we live life. And that's so important, because when we work like that, our dogs are getting impulse control and self-restraint, and regulating their emotional mind and their arousal level themselves. Because I'm not teaching them, I'm not doing anything. We are living life and working through whatever happens at that time. And that is such an important thing. I can't tell my dogs, well, sorry, your arousal level's too high. My boy Remy, your testosterone's up here. Sit down. But don't change his mind. It doesn't teach him to be aware of it, and it doesn't teach him to regulate it. All I've got is an outside behavior that I've asked for, which actually doesn't really go anywhere. it's ongoing. That doesn't mean, that means that I still have to have an input, and it's the wrong way anyway. And it doesn't teach him to progress. You know, another misconception, you have to tell me to shut up when you've had enough.
No, it's great stuff.
Another misconception here is that our dogs don't grow up. Well, they do. Their minds mature.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you wouldn't keep a child at a very low level of understanding and regulation, because how would they grow up when they become adults? They need to be able to regulate their own minds. Now, I don't need to teach or train my dogs in a way that means I constantly have to have input throughout their life to tell them what to do when they're perfectly capable of doing it themselves.
And this is at the heart of this, I think, and at the heart of a lot of the different outlooks that are coming online now. And actually it mirrors hugely for me the big shift in childhood educational psychology and development, where we're looking more about how do we support that child who is designed to dysregulate?
Yeah.
How do we support them to make have a safe way of learning, experimental learning often, about how to be better at regulating? And it's the one thing Mother Nature doesn't innately equip us for. We have to learn it. We have to learn to self-regulate better.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think I look at, I've got Molly who's 12 months now, a little bit older maybe. I've got Arthur who's 11, right? Arthur's nervous system has been on this planet for 11 years. So he is a wise soul. He's learned stuff. He's worked stuff out. I very rarely have to say anything to Arthur because he's already ahead of me, right? He's worked it out, right?
Yeah.
Molly's eyes and nervous system has only been on this planet for like 12 months. Exactly. So this notion, as you say, that they don't kind of grow up in that sense, they're always maturing. Parts of the brain are starting to think about things that can be pushed away for subconscious processing now, things that aren't that relevant, things that we do and not do. And I think it's an important process. That's why I think we owe every dog that first 2 years, not that first 6 months that gets sold to the general public about go to puppy classes and everything else will be all right. And I think this is why so many adolescent dogs, Sarah Fisher talked a lot about adolescent dogs, of course, as does Amber. So many dogs, I think it's something like 40% of dogs in the UK and the adolescent dogs end up in being relinquished because people aren't equipped, even as caregivers, to understand a lot of this stuff is developmental.
Exactly. And again, that's another misconception generally, isn't it? That you go to training class, your dogs should be mature. They're not, their minds aren't mature. An adolescent is not mature. They make bad decisions all the time. We've got to support that mind. We've got to understand what is actually going on in the mind to support it in the right way so that we don't have the wrong conversation because we think something is going on because we don't have the knowledge to know what actually is going on. So all the things that happen, and particularly those first sort of 3 years, because that's when there's so much change within the brain, there's so many things where people will get worried. If your dog does something that you don't expect, you're going to worry about it. You think there's something wrong, and if you don't know what to do, then that creates a situation where you perhaps go off in one direction or you do something because you think it might be this. And I think now that there's a lot more information coming out, that's going to help.
Yeah, and of course, for many caregivers, guardians, general public, they've got their hands tied by the kind of obedience style. Everything's a training issue rather than it being a communication attempt by the dog, I think. So the other question then, just to finish on this point, I think, what is your first step then? So say I'm somebody now, I'm just on Zoom with you and I'm going to have literally 2 minutes where you've got to just give me that little window in to free will teaching. What do you do there? What's your first invitational thing? What can somebody expect? We've got Marcia here, Marcia Pets, she says she's had the good fortune to consult with Kathie across the pond. She always looks forward to her time with you. So obviously Marcia had that little initial moment with Kathie. So what does that look like, Kathie, when we first think about this?
It looks like Okay, so the first thing you're going to do with your dog is to teach your dog language. Now, you already do this, so this is easy because your dog already knows things around the pertinent points of life, going for walks, meal times, sleep times, play times. So you already do this. Okay, now we're going to expand your dog's knowledge of words. So what we're going to do is start very simply with word association, where we are going to teach the names of objects around the home, the garden, and out and about. We can teach our dogs the names of the movements that they do when they're moving in different ways. And we will then move on to teaching our dogs to understand the emotional state they're in, how they're feeling at the time. So we start very simply. It's very easy. Our dogs typically will learn the name of a new object in about 2 or 3 times of saying it. Now, what we want to do is be natural. So we don't want to start going, if we're, say, for example, we're going to teach a dog the name of the fridge, we don't want to go up to the fridge and say, fridge. Now you see my voice, I've stripped out tone of voice, I've stripped out body language here. Now we can't neither can we start with a huge sentence. Oh my goodness, look where we are, we're at the fridge. Because how is our dog going to see which word is important here? So we start with simple sentences that just say, here's the fridge. When we get to the fridge. Now, when we've done that, we can start moving on and put things into context, because on its own, the name of something is nothing. If I say to you, fridge, you'll say to me, well, what about it? So we want to move language on to actually putting things into context. Now, this is very much about our side of the conversation, which is really only half of it, but this is a starting point for your dog to start to connect with you. And from there, we look at what our dog's saying. So we start to understand the body language. We start to understand our dog's voice. We look to see what they're saying back to us as we're doing this. And from there, we can develop that connection, that relationship, that understanding, and increase our dog's knowledge.
Brilliant. And actually, I think what would, especially for a lot of professionals listening, often with our own dogs, we do very little. And we do more about connection and listening to and verbalizing. Yeah. I remember with Kieran, when we had Bertie come to us, he came crashing in, dear Bertie. I didn't know anything about Bertie, and it was kind of an emergency kind of situation. His human mom had died, sadly, and it was all there. And I knew the people who were the executors of the will of this lady, so that's how we came into by. But I remember Kieran saying to me this a few years ago, but he said, obviously he hears me speak to clients, so he hears me educate and that kind of thing. And he said, it's really interesting how little you wanted us to do with Bertie, and how we really looked at how we supported the environment for him, how we tried to connect to him verbally and just kind of reassuringly and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting that he picked up on that, and I thought, yeah, you're right, because we tend to feel more connected as professionals. I think we do a lot of things differently at home that we might get clients to do, for example. I think so. A lot of this stuff then, Kathie, isn't kind of like completely kind of very left field that we'd never think of. Like you say, well, we're doing it already. It's just we don't have a structure or a framework for it, and that's what you have so brilliantly and beautifully put together with free will teaching, of course. And it gives people a framework for those who want to think about this. I'm sure many people could muddle through and do it, like a lot of things, but having that framework is what is so beautiful. And of course, you as an individual, I have to say, you're as Marcia said, you're very empathic and compassionate person, and that comes across in the support you offer people, I think, who are going through that journey. It's very difficult. Right, so Kathie, brilliant. Where can people find more about your work? We'll make sure we put some links in, guys, so don't worry about that. But yeah, where's the best place for things or Kathie?
At the moment, the best place is my Facebook group, which is called There Is More to Teaching Dogs Than Training Dogs. I do have a website, but it's being redesigned at the moment, so that's not really up and live. But so at the moment it's the group, and
Brilliant.
everybody's welcome to come in, read the posts, get a feel for what we do, and ask questions.
Yeah, and we must get people over into the group, and I think when your website's up and running, we can share that, of course. And
thank you.
And also the books as well, Tale of Two Horses and Puppy Called Wolfie. The group's amazing, Kathie, and what a great title. I like the title as well because, again, I think if you'd have called it Free Will Teaching, people would have thought, well, I don't know what it is necessarily. And
exactly. Now then, I have to tell you, my friend Bethany came up with that. That's all down to her, nothing to do with me.
I don't know whether you're listening, Bethany, but I think Bethany's been a great, I can see in that group, Bethany's a big support, I think, which is always useful, I think, Kathie. And I know also, you know, I can say this at the end now, because, you know, I know that how lucky we are to have a chat today, because it's not something you do very much. And I think, you know, I'm really, really thankful and very grateful that you've kind of entrusted us here within the group to have a conversation tonight.
You are very welcome. And as I know you, I knew I was in safe hands. You know, I haven't felt nervous at all.
Great, good. Even when even when I was saying about you and Sheila Harper, that must be one of those awkward things. I remember on the BBC over here in the UK, they had a guy who was waiting to do a cleaning job or something, and they pulled him onto live news because they thought he was one of the guests.
Oh no!
And they were asking him all these questions, and he was just kind of nodding and saying, "You did very well there," even though I was on the wrong side of things there. So there you go. Well, it's been a great chat tonight, Kathie. I think it's gone, you know, people have really connected with what we talked about tonight, and so really thankful for that. I'll make sure we put the links in. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We've got the wonderful Tracy binding on Thursday, so we've got an extra chat this week, which is great, looking at zoopharmacognosy and looking at how that integrated through ACE, you know, animal-centered education. Obviously, we've had ACing August this month, which has been a great kind of thing. There's so much good stuff at the moment, Kathie.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
It is, yeah. I find it just hard to kind of keep up really with stuff because there's so much great content coming on. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening, and thank you, Kathie, for an amazing conversation. And you must come back again sometime.
I'd love to, actually. Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening as well.
Bye, everybody.